What do most people get wrong about empathy?
That's a very good question. So I think people tend to mix up empathy with sympathy, right? So they'll think, oh, that happened to you, that really sucks. And they'll kind of feel bad for you. And that's not super helpful, right? Because no one wants to be pitied. Empathy is meant to connect us and bring us together, whereas sympathy tends to drive people apart. So with empathy, it's all about trying to connect to what the person is feeling and meeting them where they are. So it's not pity, it's not trying to fix things, it's just feeling with someone. So it's a starting point. It's not the end point, it's a starting point to building relationship. I think that's the thing that people tend to get wrong.
So it's just the beginning. It's just like the piece at the start. And then, so what's the rest then? Right? Because empathy is this thing I must show up as always having, right? Otherwise I'm a bad person or something. I don't know.
Well, it's not about being a bad person. Right? It's about, so empathy is something I think everyone should work on developing. And there's lots of great writers who talk about empathy that you can read about. So Brené Brown has written on empathy. Simon Sinek, like lots of...
All of my favorite authors.
Right?
Rachel,
Wonderful.
You're just listing my favorite authors.
And I think it's a useful practice for everyone, but for leaders, it's indispensable, right? Because as a leader, you want to command authority and you want people to follow you so that you can build something great, right? And you want to bring the best out of your people. The best way to do that is to have empathy, to connect with people, and that's the start of the journey. And then it allows you to build a strong enough relationship that you can build on that.
You're still applying it everywhere you go, though, right? So if I've got a team member, every time I see them, I feel like there's a default mindset or energy level that one must show up as having, and that's consistent. So it's like it starts a cycle, but that cycle needs to continue rapidly. With every interaction, I must continue showing up with empathy. Would you agree with that? And
Yeah,
also,
for
like,
sure.
is that not really draining?
Okay,
We outline it like that.
I was like, how do I politely say that? The way you phrased it sounds exhausting.
It
but
does.
It's not. It's actually freeing, right? It allows you to
Okay.
be more human in your interactions. So when I first, started managing people, started being in leadership roles, both at my startup, but also in, I'll call them corporate side hustles, where you work, you have your 9 to 5, but really you're building your business and it's like, no, the business is the main thing, everything over there.
I've actually never heard
hustle.
corporate side hustle before, but
there
I
you
love
go.
that. I'm never going to
Neither have
that.
I, actually. I think
you just made that up. I will make sure to credit you with that. That's great.
Thank you. So in my experience of leadership, of management, I felt that I had to be a particular way. So I'd read all these books, like The 1 Minute Manager, and I would think, okay, I need to be all of these things to the people that I am leading. And that is exhausting, right? Like, some of those tools are really helpful. When I train people on management, I recommend they read The 1 Minute Manager, but I say, don't follow it in this way. And I promise you, it does not take a minute. Like, that's a gimmick, that's a lie, but the principles are great. And this idea of having like quadrants where you show up differently, whether it's kind of like mentoring or directing, all that stuff is good. If we take a step back, it's not about stepping in and thinking, oh, I need to be a really good manager. It's about stepping in and thinking, okay, let's find out what this person needs. So whether it's your one-to-one, whether it's a team away day, whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's a different kind of one-on-one where you're developing a leader, if you turn up and your first question is, how are you really doing? That's very different from, how are you? Okay, into the agenda, right? When you don't know what energy you're going to be met with. If you approach everything with curiosity and an open mind, it's the opposite of draining, right? It's quite freeing, and it allows you to lead in a more fluid approach.
Hey everyone, I wanted to take one quick sec to talk about a new partner that I am so excited to announce I have on the show, an agency called Untapped. Untapped exists to put your brand in the world's pocket with beautifully crafted, high-impact mobile experiences. They've worked with brands like Barclays, EA Sports, American Express, and even the UK government. They're known for creating powerful apps with intuitive, seamless interactions that drive customer engagement and elevate brand recognition. But it isn't just tech development. Their expertise is bridging phenomenal quality technology with beautiful design to create the highest quality product possible that takes your users on a real journey with you. You may remember Will, the founder of Untapped, from episode 13 of the podcast. If you haven't heard that chat, I highly recommend it because it shows you what kind of no-nonsense, sleeves-rolled-up kind of people he and the team he's built really are, and it reflects in the kind of work that they do. They want to make their clients' work recognized across their industries and drive real game-changing value, something I've personally experienced and appreciated working with them myself. For businesses who want to take this next step in their journey, Untapped can help with everything from tech creation to brand design to product marketing and so much more. All right, the links are down below. Check it out. And now back to the episode. You're describing a change in habit, a change in perspective. Because the way I phrased it sounds draining is because it sounds active. I must go around thinking about this and that and all the time. And actually, if it's the default state, right? Habits don't drain us for a reason. We don't have to think about them. We just do it. So you're describing a default state. Okay, so now walk me through how I build this default state.
Yeah, okay, we'll do that. So I definitely agree with everything you've said. It shouldn't be draining because I talk about how to be an empathetic leader, right? Not how to do empathy. It's not something you do. It's kind of, it becomes someone you are. So the first thing is actually giving yourself compassion, because we can't meet others with compassion and empathy if we haven't given ourselves compassion first. So thinking about, your own state, I definitely recommend that people have a morning routine. And within that routine, they have some space for reflecting on how they feel so they can be self-aware. There's a book I really love, and I've now forgotten the name of it, which is, what's it called? Mindful Business Leadership, I think is the name. I'll double check and send it to you. You can put
a very memorable name.
Right? But it's about thinking of your leadership style and the shadows that come with it. Right. So one of these is they've got fun names for everything. I'm really terrible at remembering the exact detail. But one of them is someone who comes in and they're very commanding. They drive everyone forward. I have a hurry up driver, so this one resonated with me. I'm like, we're going ahead. We're going to close the deal. We're going to get this done. We're going to, launch a new product. Lots of energy. But the shadow side of that, which is all very good. It means you get things done. You close deals. You create forward motion. The shadow side, I remember the name of, it's the bulldozer.
Ah, that sounds right.
Yeah. Okay. And it's very much like, if you're not moving with me, I'm going to keep moving, so I'm going to flatten you on the way.
Is this like the 6 leadership styles?
Maybe.
Stuff?
I haven't come across that.
I'm going to forget some of them, but like coaching leadership versus commanding leadership versus, and there's like 6 of them. And you can be multiple at once as well. You can be fluid and move between. Yes. People tend to have a default state, like you said, they go into.
It covers lots of things like that. So there's lots of overlap. But what I'd say is understanding your style is super important. So for me, I'm someone who, I've got 4 kids. I'm typically pretty maternal and caring in terms of just the way I am outside of work and in work. And I was horrified to see I'm a bulldozer. And I had to stop and think, because generally, I'm quite kind to people. People quite like working with me. I get positive feedback. People who've left my companies or places where I've worked with them, we tend to keep in touch. Like, relationships are a strength of mine. Then I had to reflect and be honest and think about all the times I've bulldozed people. And it was really hard. It's hard to accept that shadow part of yourself. And especially a trait that's positive, because you don't want to change the positive trait, right? You just want to make sure that you're doing things in an empathetic way so that the shadows aren't overpowering. So I think the first step is that self-awareness. For me, I start my morning, I pray, I read the Bible, I journal, I do a bit of exercise. I need to do those things. And when I pray and when I journal, I'm reflecting on what I need, how I'm feeling. I'm being honest with that. which means I can show up authentically and there's no strange subconscious drivers or like feeling insecure and trying to prove myself through being really hardline, which is exactly how I was about 10 years ago, right? When I first launched my business, it was, I have to be this way, I have to prove myself, no one believes in me. Being an underestimated founder, that's so common. But actually now I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs, I've worked with executives at, various big corporations, and these feelings are just human nature, right? They apply to all of us. Some people might be aware of them. If you're from a marginalized group, it's a little bit more obvious. But for all of us, there are difficult feelings that we have to face. If we don't face them, they're going to show up in our leadership and in our management. So it's better to face them, deal with your stuff, get a coach, get a therapist if you need to. I found group coaching to be really helpful for execs as well. And once you do those things, it will help you naturally to be more empathetic. The next thing is read the coaching habit, right? And then pick a few questions that fit with who you authentically are and lead with those questions. So one of the questions that I really love, I can't remember if it's from the coaching habit, but in my one-to-ones, I'd say, okay, what are we working on at the moment? How can I help? And just leave it open-ended, be comfortable with awkward silences and let people speak. So I know I've given you a whole bunch of stuff there. You can tell I've probably been thinking about these things for a while. The big thing is have self-awareness, have self-compassion, and that will help you to show up with empathy.
What's the coaching habit? Is that a book?
It's a book, yes.
Okay.
I'm going to have to send you links.
You have to send me a whole bunch of books. We talk about a bunch of books today.
I have a problem when it comes to reading. I read so many things, but then I forget sometimes which book the idea is from, and I have to go read
I get it.
things.
It's fine. We're going to cover later how you end up finding the time for all these things. Cause
I have tips on that too.
Okay, good. Before we get into that, are you familiar with the ostrich metaphor?
No.
And make it sound more deep than it is. So when an ostrich is scared for its life, they bury their heads in the sand. They, for whatever reason, haven't developed the survival instinct that most other animals, including ourselves, have, to understand that they need to physically get away. Ostriches, for whatever reason, if they don't perceive it as existing, it must not exist, which is kind
like
of
true. 2-year-old human, right?
It's kind of true. Philosophically, it's kind of true, but physically, they'll still get hunted and die. So it doesn't really... But we act like that ourselves. We act as though when something doesn't exist, or when we don't see it, we pretend it's not there, it won't exist. And I think we do this mostly with our emotions and with our mentality. So you're talking there about being reflective. That is creating conscious awareness of something that you have. Whether you acknowledge it or not, it's still there. If I've got a challenge with authority, if I've got a challenge with bulldozing over people, it's going to be there whether I acknowledge it or not. And what I find useful, and I would love your thoughts on this, is to just simply go, what result do I want? Because if I want the best result, I need to do whatever I want for that result. Sometimes the result for people is, I'm doing this for my ego. And that's a different challenge, right? But if the result you want is bigger than yourself, it's easier to go, oh, I've been burying my head in the sand. And that's not, it still exists whether I ignore it or not, so I may as well acknowledge it and face it head on.
For sure. I think ego is such a big issue with so many entrepreneurs. I find that you can almost, this is going to sound horribly offensive to everyone, and it probably is, but you can almost split entrepreneurs into two major camps. The ones who are driven by ego, either by proving themselves or by showing that they're great deep down and no one recognized it. All those who are just kind of deeply damaged and broken. And therefore they're like...
Why do I feel so called out? What?
Yeah,
no, I'm kidding.
They have like looked suffering in the face and they're like, oh, damn, I don't want other people to feel this way. And then, and that's not a bad thing, right? But then they feel responsible for minimizing the suffering of others. And they take that on board. And then it's like, no, I have to do this. It's like life or death. And they overly identify with their mission. And it's very hard for me not to automatically categorize people into these two camps. And there's one camp I prefer, probably because it's the one I'm more familiar with, right?
Sure.
And it's not like good people and bad people. It's just different driving forces, right?
Yeah.
So that means that these groups, they might have genuine, brilliant objectives. They might have these great ambitions that they want to go after and they want to help people and they have a mission and they have a purpose and they're driving towards it and they're doing a great job. But they're going to have some mixed motives unless they deal with that stuff, right? Because both ego is very unhelpful, right? It's unhealthy to be led by it. But what's equally unhelpful, but I think in our society we like accidentally reward, is kind of this weird subservience and hero complex, right? Where you take on responsibility for things that are not your responsibility. And then rather than like, okay, I'm going to help with this. If my help isn't wanted, fine. It's like, no, I need to help you with this. If you don't want my help, I have to show you that you need my help. But we reward it in our society because we see it as, oh, they're a helper, they're a great person. And actually it can be unhelpful and unhealthy, both for that person who is, making themselves subservient and overly giving where maybe they need to chill.
Yeah.
And for the person who's being helped and maybe feels a bit helpless, right? And feels like, oh, I can't do this for myself because you have to help me with this.
Yeah. I'm sure you've noticed this coaching and consulting and helping other founders. People like us who are in a position of supporting other people to accelerate their journey of development. That's, therapists, coaches, spiritual leaders, all of the above and lots more. We have a huge responsibility on our shoulders. This is how I've come to see it, because not just because we're there to help or not, because you can give someone something they aren't ready for and damage them or hurt them or be unhelpful when you're trying to be helpful. So what you just described is really interesting, because to go around with this mindset that is praised by society of, well, you tried to help. Did it get a better result? Did it confuse or hurt or overwhelm the other person?
Also, did they invite that help? Did they want that help? Genuinely.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a big difference between helping someone with an attitude of, I want to help, where you will be open to them being receptive or not being receptive, and I need to help. Where it's like, take this gift I'm giving you. The gift might be good, right? But we shouldn't be forcing gifts on people.
One of the first things I learned when I learned coaching, they taught us like 10 rules of coaching or whatever. One of them which was framed as like a moral attitude, was you cannot coach someone who has not asked for it. In other words, you can't help someone who hasn't asked for help.
Yes.
Now, it's framed morally. The interesting layer that I've noticed, that I'm sure you've noticed in business, because it's exactly the same in business, we're talking about the psychology of people, is people don't respect it if they haven't asked for it. They don't take it on board. I'm not listening to you.
And sometimes they resent it even.
Exactly. So
and
there's
then
a
you feel
resistance.
Like, I'm trying to help you and you're giving me attitude and pushback. But actually, did they ask for that help?
Yeah. So that becomes the challenge, right? And then, so is that constructive either? So you've kind of outlined these two people, these two theoretical groups, but they both sound unhelpful.
In a needlessly offensive way, I have to admit. I didn't sleep much last night because one of my kids was sick.
No.
There we go.
Can I outline what I have found to be a more helpful, constructive two groups?
Yes. Do it with more empathy than I did.
Okay.
Because I'm not modeling my thing here.
Okay. So Stephen Bartlett had this concept of driven or dragged. Now, what you're describing, you're saying kind of you're driven by one of these two things. I would call both of those dragged.
Yes, I hear that. Because you're not aware of the thing that is compelling you.
Yeah. Are you being, is something pushing you from behind to go, oh, I'm going to run confidently towards my goal, where you're driven by something? Or is something like got a rope around you and pulling you? It's a big difference. And there's a beautiful story from a podcast called Feel Better, Live More that I listen to, which is a health and wellness podcast, biggest in the UK, I think. So really, really big. And he had Gabor Mate on. You know who Gabor Mate is? So Gabor Mate talking about trauma and things like this. The host says, I have a doctor. So he's a doctor. He has a friend who's a surgeon or something. And this friend says, his friend never takes his annual leave. He takes like very little annual leave. And his reason, his self-proclaimed reason, is because his patients need him. And Gabor Mate goes, do his patients need him, or does he need his patients? And so if it's really that you're the one who needs the validation that you are enough, that you're helping people, I'd argue you're probably being dragged by something, whether that's a need for approval or some other unhelpful survival emotion that's telling you you're not good enough. And if that's the state you're in, maybe that's a warning sign of, oh, I need to work on either letting that go or moving towards being more driven, or both. And so that brings me to my next question, which is, how do I do that? How do I shift into a more helpful state?
So I think a very helpful framework to use is schema theory. And yeah, schema therapy is great. So it's the idea that we have these like building blocks that help us to navigate our lives. So if you're learning to drive a car, you might say, oh, I've never driven a car before. But when you were a kid, did you drive one of those little toy cars? Have you, played computer games where you have to turn a steering wheel and move a car? Have you ridden a bike? Have you used anything with wheels, right? Have you pressed buttons?
Okay.
So all of those things will be the schemas, the building blocks you need for the skill. So as an adult, there are different types of schemas you can operate from, and there's two healthy types of schemas.
Okay.
So the healthy types of schemas are healthy adult and happy child, and they're both fine. It's fine to be a child, but it's not fine if you're a scared, anxious, subservient child, right? And it's good to be healthy adult, but if you're in an adult mode where you're punishing and you're bossing people around because you think that's how you have to operate, and those are the schemas you learn, that's what you've seen modeled, that's not great either. Many people operate from one of the various unhealthy schemas, but the ones to try to be in are happy child, where you're just having fun, you're being your true self, and healthy adult. So any responsibility you have, you want it to be from an adult stance, right? You want it to be you're a healthy adult with these responsibilities helping people, not you are a scared child who is subservient to someone's needs and you feel that you have to caretake for them so that they don't yell at you. That's a very unhealthy place to be. So definitely recommend researching schema theory and finding a schema therapist to work with. I had some executive coaching where we worked through schema therapy, and we would have sessions where I'm like, okay, this is meant to be executive coaching. There's some major stuff going on. This was during lockdown. There was a Black Lives Matter movement. And within my various roles, so at this point I had board responsibilities. I was doing some degree of consulting, mentoring, workshops, public speaking, and then I had my team. So as well as the people I directly managed, I also had leadership influence over, dozens more people. And people were coming to me with quite serious things they were going through, family members with cancer, people having miscarriages, all this difficult stuff that you support people with. And then you carry this emotional weight. And during this whole period, my company was going through some serious stress because we had a large order of a retailer who'd ordered products for 200 stores. So I had this, my first business was a cosmetic brand.
200 stores. So
which is great.
That's an overwhelming amount of product, though.
Wonderful. Yeah. And we'd placed the order and we'd paid for it and we had all this stock being delivered, and then lockdown hit and they pulled the order. And suddenly we had to sell all these products online, and we were selling maybe 200, not 200, like about 600 units to around 200 customers a month at this point. So I looked at it, I was like, wow, okay, so we suddenly need to serve 1,500 customers a month in order to use this stock before it goes bad. And these were natural cosmetics. So I had all this stress on my shoulders of the survival of the company. I had all this people stuff to support people with, both in my company and outside. And then I was also processing all my feelings around what was happening with George Floyd, people suddenly being hyper aware of race, and sometimes that being just like super annoying. I felt more kind of othered and treated like my skin colour was the be all and end all than ever. And that was quite a lot to handle. And then I would turn up to my exec coaching sessions, and I had two types. So I had a one-on-one coach, and then I was in a coaching circle. And with my one-on-one sessions, I would quite often be asked, how are things at home? How are the kids? How are things with your husband? And then I found that we were working through like little low-level conflicts I had with my husband and how that made me feel. And I didn't understand it at the time. I thought this is kind of an expensive waste of time. But in hindsight, looking back, I saw that actually I had a lot of imbalance, right? That there was discord in my kind of work-life approach. I needed work-life harmony. And because of that, the way that I was showing up was very much from an unhealthy schema. So I wasn't a healthy adult turning up to help people with these really difficult things they were processing. I felt that I had to, and I was taking on a lot. So apparently I was quite a good manager in those days, according to my team. But I felt the cost of it. I ended up, suffering bad health, which is often what happens to us when we're not processing our emotions. Our body forces us to slow down and take a break. So I think a really good framework is schema theory, and using that, working with someone who won't be scared to look at your life holistically to support you with that can be a good start. If you're not ready to work with someone, read some books, just familiarize yourself with it, and then find a coach or a schema therapist when you're ready.
I'm going to look into that because I'm going to need to add that to my roster of tools.
Yeah.
Help us understand a little bit what gets you up in the morning and your story, right? What are the significant experiences that have shaped who you are now?
Oh,
having this conversation
scary
with me.
Question. So the obvious thing for me at the moment, and I would say I'm definitely in my healthy adult, happy child mode, which is great. It's taken like over 10 years of trauma therapy to get to this stage, but here we are.
Nice. I'm very happy for you.
Thank you. I'm happy for me too.
Good, as you should be.
But 2 years ago, so when I was in the process of selling my company, I was being pushed, right? I wasn't ready to part ways with it. And I had overly identified with this brand that I'd built. I was 18 when I set it up. I was very much the face of the brand reluctantly. It was through customer focus groups where they'd say, okay, this is a brand, but we trust you. You're the person who nerds out on hair. You're the person who understands the science, who studied psychology, who makes the products yourself and knows every ingredient. We want to see more of you. And the brand grew when I stopped being an introvert hiding in the shadows, and I got more comfortable with, overcoming my stage fright and just speaking to people. So I'd gone from, like doing these talks and having people queue up for an hour to speak to me, building newsletters, building social media communities, connecting with people, having, I hated this, but having people stop me and ask for a photograph with me and like tell me what an impact I'd had on them. I went from that to suddenly finding myself in a position where I had to choose between my family and this company I cared about so much. Because I had twins and they were unwell. They had, I know the twins. Surprise.
My mom's twins, so I kind of get it from the stories that I hear anyway.
Yeah, I think it must be the most wonderful thing in the world to be a twin. Like I look at them and I'm like, I wish I had a twin. It's so beautiful, their bond. Like if one of them falls and hurts themselves, the other one will go over and like kiss it better. They'll wake up and they have their little ritual where one of them goes, hi baby, and the other says hello baby, and my heart just melts every time.
And you got 4 kids, don't you? So you see a difference between them and the other siblings' interactions.
Absolutely. So it's like, so all of them love each other. They're very sweet. All of them fight a lot as well.
Okay, nice.
And a great book if you're a parent is Siblings Without Rivalry, which I need to reread, but it's an excellent book to help your kids to be close to each other if you have multiple. I find that with my older 2, it takes a lot longer for them to miss each other. If one of them has a play date or a party or a club that the other one's not at, they quite relish that time without them. And then they'll get to a point where they're like, okay, when are they coming home now? I need my play buddy. Whereas with my twins, it's minutes. It's, if one of them wakes up, they go and bother their sister. They have to wake up the other one, right? It's so cute to see. But yeah, so when they were unwell, they're great now. They're healthy. They're happy. very grateful for the NHS and also private healthcare that was needed to help them navigate their health challenges and go through surgery and recover and everything. But it's terrifying to hear that your 3-month-old babies need surgery. Just, it's not something I would wish on anyone. It's awful. And when I learned that they were so unwell, they needed this surgery, they needed pretty much round the clock care, and there were signs I had to look out for that we might need to go from an elective surgery to emergency. And there were a few times where I had to, drive them to A&E, find someone to come help me because I was really, struggling, especially if my husband was at work and I needed to just move. So that was a huge low point, and I ended up with very severe postnatal depression. So it was during this time where I was not myself. I was the lowest I'd ever been. I was carrying all this responsibility. I just couldn't also navigate the economic downturn, all the changes that were happening. There were a number of things that kind of went wrong in the company, but there was so much that was good. So right before I went on maternity leave, I had just closed a deal with Selfridges. So we were, in this iconic retailer. We'd just done a book box partnership with Pam Macmillan. So, one of the big 5 publishers. We'd grown our team. We were just about to properly launch in the US. We had US customers. We sold into 56 countries, but not with a proper base in the States. We just set that up. And we'd closed a small investment round. So everything was brilliant. I was like, great, I'll take my 3 to 6 months off. I'll ease my way back in part-time. I'll figure it out. And I remember someone on my board at the time had said to me, oh, so you're going to be like the Yahoo CEO, right? I didn't know anything about the Yahoo CEO. I'm like, what do you mean? And they said to me, they had twins and they were back at work within 2 weeks. This is an American.
This is it's so American, isn't it?
So
Jeez.
American.
Anyway.
And I was a little bit petrified of this notion. But I also realized that I felt this pressure of, I have to be back and I have to show that actually having kids doesn't slow you down. Of course, having kids slows you down. Like, it should, right? And I had my kind of work-life harmony was all tipped. And then suddenly, like, it was overly in work. So very much my kids have always come first. I put them first. But my kids had been, in a playpen in the office, tied to my back in meetings. It was very much, I'm going to live my life and you'll be with me because attachment is important. So they were coming into my world more than me going into theirs, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
With my twins, especially with their health challenges, everything flipped. I couldn't bring them into my world. I had to go quite fully into theirs. And it was good for me, right? I was overly identified with my startup. And I remember my aunt coming over just as I was negotiating the sale. And we had 3 bidders who put in offers to buy the company because, really solid business, just going through some temporary blips. And unfortunately, I couldn't find someone to step in and run it for me while I needed to focus on my babies. So it was a great opportunity. There were 3 solid offers on the table. And it was going to the person who said that they'll keep the team, they'll keep the formulations the same. And that was so important to me. Whether they did or did not is another question for another day.
Okay.
That's, but for legal reasons, I can't talk too much about that, is all I'll say right now. But at the time, my aunt, who's an accountant, came over and she said to me, so I was talking to her about all my woes and I was like, this is so hard. She said 2 things that I will never forget. The first thing she said is, Rachel, the company is not your baby. They are your babies. And it was so clear. And I didn't really hear it. I didn't really understand it. And the second thing she said is, you are not this company. You are not this company. And she started to talk to me about how she's done a lot of work with Deloitte, PwC, I think Goldman Sachs, big companies. And she's looked at these reports about women and we can ignore the reality of, childbearing, child rearing, the impact it has on you as an individual, but also your life and career. She said a lot of entrepreneurs, they actually have their second wave in their 40s. She was like, you are so young. At this point, I think I was, not long. It was not long after I just turned 30. And she said to me, just focus on your kids and come back to all this business stuff. And it really helped me to think about actually who are the successful female entrepreneurs I know who are parents, okay, a lot of them are in their 40s. It's okay. I may be, hopelessly compelled to solve problems, and it may be that I build various business, but then my whole kind of time frame shifted. It was okay, I can build stuff slowly, and it can take off when I'm in my 40s and the kids are grown up and they don't need me as much. But yeah, so I would say the shift from there to where I am now has been quite dramatic, and it's built on a lot of the work I was doing anyway, because I had a pretty difficult childhood, lots of trauma. Have you heard of the ACT, the Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE, the ACE school thing?
I think so, yeah.
So I think there's 10 things that if you experience these 3 or more, it has a huge impact on your life.
I have heard this, but I've never looked into it properly.
Well, look at them. Okay. So 3 or more, you're quite severely traumatized and you should get some help. I had like 9, right? So
wow, okay.
Quite an intense, difficult childhood and upbringing. And there was lots to unpack, lots of work to do. So I'd been in therapy for a while and I thought I was so self-aware. But what I was definitely doing was compartmentalizing. So I was doing the working on myself stuff, I was running the business, and I didn't realize how much I was trying to prove myself. I was trying to prove not just myself. I saw it as almost like a service for others. Like I had to prove that people who came from a background like mine could still thrive and do well in business. People who had kids can still be successful. And I put all this unnecessary pressure on myself. Whereas now I'm just embracing the journey. I'm like, if my success, if my life can be an example and a help to others, wonderful. But I'm going to live it the best way I can, either way.
What did that unlock for you? Right, this awareness clearly developed, and it sounds like it developed slowly but quickly, if you get what I mean. It's like, obviously it's over a slow period of time, but actually
then there's that aha moment.
You get the aha moment, you get the light bulb, you get the hockey stick of internal personal development growth, whatever, and suddenly you're at the top of a peak and you're like, oh, I don't know exactly how I got here, but I feel great.
Yeah.
What was it like for you?
That. So I think it's unlocked a greater level of authenticity and empathy, actually. So I think it's Brene Brown, I think. It's either in Dare to Lead or I'm so bad at remembering book titles. I think it's Dare to Lead, where she talks about authenticity being about letting go of who you think you're supposed to be so that you can be who you actually are, right? So I have always been a hopelessly nerdy, scientifically minded investigator, right? I like to truly understand a topic before I dare to speak to anyone about it, and just for my own enjoyment. But I felt that, it's too much. I'm too much of a nerd. I need to hide that part. And actually now, even with my newsletter, so I've built a newsletter community. There's over 20,000 people in the newsletter. What they really like is me saying, hey, this is what I'm learning at the moment. I've been reading about this. This is what the stats say. This is what the studies say. Isn't this interesting? And it doesn't matter whether people personally want to nerd out, but being able to, distill complicated scientific ideas into something simple and accessible is a useful skill that I've developed. And even though I have an MSc and this is a skill set that I'm qualified in, that I've studied, that I've spent time on, I wouldn't talk much about it because I thought it's just off-putting to people. And it is to some people. That's fine. Maybe I'm not their person. That's okay.
Exactly.
Right?
You attract what is meant for you.
Exactly.
You don't need to worry about what isn't.
Exactly. And marrying that with actually talking about my kids, talking about work-life harmony, I've been able to do that so much more and help so many people, and then actually launch the Mumdem Pod and Mumdem CIC to support mums who are juggling work and motherhood and figuring out, how do I do this? How do I show up for my kids and do the best work that I can? So actually I found that going through all these challenges and difficulties over the last few years, and I guess over the course of my life, I was driven to this point of, okay, am I going to harmonize everything and accept that, humans were multifaceted beings and compartmentalization is just unhelpful? Or am I going to say, well, in truth, I needed to compartmentalize while I worked through some quite serious trauma, And now that I'm in a better, healthier place, I can start to talk about that stuff. I can start to bring together this holistic picture of who I am and connect with other people holistically, right? So now when I'm working with people, I feel far more comfortable talking to them in a, professional, appropriate way about their personal life. And I've connected with so many, for instance, other mothers of multiples, people who are like, it is insane having twins and trying to do anything, but also understanding that it drives you so much. It's so hard. It's like, if I'm going to work and do this, the success has to be on a scale to match the challenge, right? Because raising twins is a lot of work. So I definitely think the main thing I've gained from the kind of aha moment is a more holistic view of myself, which allows me to show up with greater authenticity and empathy for others.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here really quickly with an offer for you. Those of you who are a little newer to my work, which is most of you looking at the show's stats, will probably not know that for much of my career, I've been working with people to take more ownership of their lives as a coach, mentor, guide, and educator. This show exists to help people discover and cultivate their greatest inner leader. And that stems from a personal mission of mine. But what does it actually mean? Well, I break this down into 3 things: calm, confidence, and courage. We could all do with a little bit more, at least a little bit more, of all 3 of those things in our lives. But how do we make it happen? Well, that depends on us, on our temperament and our context, and so much more. So I've developed a free tool to help us understand 3 of the biggest things that I've noticed hold us back from those really powerful states to be in: restlessness, reactivity, and resistance. What I help folks do is move from that place into that place of calm, courage, and confidence instead. So you can use the link below to check that out. It's totally free, super simple, quick, and easy to use so that you can get just a little bit of clarity in that regard. And I created it just for this show because I noticed how important it was to overcome exactly those challenges. That's what the show is trying to help you do after all, so why not make it easy for you? So with all that being said, I really appreciate you. Hope you find that useful, and let's get back into this episode. There's a sense of responsibility that I think one can develop when they stop living in judgment. What you're describing is judgment of really of the self, getting in the way of your empathy towards yourself.
Yes.
And that's got me thinking, okay, therefore judgment and empathy are not compatible. You must be in a space of non-judgment to be able to understand others and connect with them deeply. And non-judgment is one of these words used particularly by the Dharmic religions or belief systems in terms of our spiritual development or just personal development, development in general. I'm thinking, when you get to a place where there is non-judgment towards others, you can connect deeply. And when you get to a place where there's non-judgment of the self, you can take responsibility to change your life. And so there's a lot of things that come out. If your end goal is empathy, a lot of things come out of trying to do that successfully. A lot more than most people think. Right?
Yeah.
Like we said at the beginning, most people think that it's just understand people better, put yourself in their shoes, which is like, okay, it's a starting place, I guess, but it's much more...
You can't really, right? Because this idea, like this whole idea of, walk 2 miles in someone else's shoes, it's like, but you'll be you walking in their shoes.
Yes.
It's not the same thing.
Yes.
Right? I can't possibly understand exactly what it means to be Seven Jacobs, right? I can't understand every single experience you've had. And even with those close to you, when you try and put yourself in their shoes, in a way it can lead to more judgment. Because it's like, well, I wouldn't have done it like that. And this idea that, actually we all could almost do anything in a different set of circumstances is quite helpful. Recognizing, I think, facing your own shadows, facing your own flaws, your own issues, your own unhealthy patterns helps you to be more empathetic with others, because you have to exercise that compassion, that empathy towards yourself. And I think the idea of non-judgment can get very messy and complicated because we mix up like helpful critique with judgment. Right? So I don't want someone to judge me, but I want useful feedback to help me grow, to help me be better. I just don't want to be almost condemned.
Yes.
Right?
How do you distinguish between the two?
Yeah, so I probably have quite a almost like biblical sense of this.
Okay.
Like I've been a Christian for almost 15 years now. And it's very funny because I was finishing my law degree when I became a Christian. So I was looking at everything, we're very legalized and a lot of skepticism and like going to research the original Greek and Hebrew and whatnot. And I probably kept that vibe in my Bible study.
That's actually probably really useful for understanding
so useful.
it. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, because there are so many things that get taken out of context or are commonly misinterpreted. I read a really great book called Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes that is very much like, okay, remember that most of us here reading this book, we live in the West.
Yep.
Jesus did not live in the West.
Jesus was probably brown or black.
Was like almost certainly a brown Palestinian man who lived in the Middle East within a set of cultures where certain things he said would have made sense to that culture, right? So anyway, so understanding all of that, looking at judgment. Judgment comes with condemnation, right? So a judge is someone who comes down with the final decision on something, right? And there's a reason that Jesus said, do not judge, right? You know, and talked about linking judgment to others with judgment to yourself. People who are really harsh with others, they tend to lack self-compassion, right? So learning to love yourself, be compassionate, be empathetic towards yourself is almost a prerequisite to being able to do that for others. And the difference between that and, I guess in the biblical sense, this idea of, okay, take the log out of your eye so you can take the speck out of your brother's eye. This great preacher, his name I cannot remember, talked about the fact that a log and a speck, it's all about perspective, right? Because from here, if I see something in your eye and it's like, oh, it's just a little speck, if you can feel that, if it's like you've got an eyelash in your eye, it's digging in, it really hurts you, right?
It's really obvious.
It feels like
to
a
me.
log, it's obvious to you.
Right.
And it's meant to be so that you can deal with it, right? And it's the same with the difficulties in our lives. So something you're facing, a challenge you're facing, it might feel like this massive log, but to someone with an external perspective, it looks like a little speck. And if you try and help me with my tiny little speck and you've got a big log, you're in pain. All you're going to do is transfer your frustration, your pain over to me, right? If you deal with your own stuff first, then you'll be able to see clearly to help me with my little speck. And that concept for me was just revolutionary. This idea that, okay, right, you have to almost like make a judgment call without judging. I have to recognize there's something in my eye. I have to make an assessment of that and take action based on it. But it's not helpful for me to be like, oh, I deserve this thing in my eye and it's my own fault that it's in my eye. None of that contributes to removing it. And in the same way, when I come to you and it's like, oh, there's a speck, it's not, well, you didn't brush your eyelashes today and that's why you've got one in your eye. That's not helpful. That kind of judgment, or you deserve it, we're keeping it there, not helpful. What's helpful is making an assessment, maybe offering some critique of, oh, you know, there's lots of like debris on your face and some of it is going to end up in your eye if you keep up with this. That is so much more helpful. So making assessments, giving, you know, useful, constructive criticism, all good, and we can call that judgment. But it's not judgment. Judgment comes more with condemnation, and that's the thing we want to avoid. You want to be able to give people feedback in a way that's helpful to them so that they can remove the things that are difficult for them in their lives.
It's so powerful. I've been thinking and writing recently about this idea that you cannot have directionality without intentionality.
Deep.
And if the intentionality is to be genuinely helpful, that begs the question, is whatever I'm about to do, say, being helpful? Or is it what I think is helpful? Is it what the other person needs or what I want to give them?
And also, is it truly about helping the other person? Or is it about the need for belonging and usefulness that I feel because maybe some of my core needs haven't been met?
I'm doing it just to serve myself. And then the intentionality changes. And that might also show up as critique. I want to help you, not as critique, as judgment. I want to help you.
You won't be helped.
But did you think about this and that? And it becomes very judgmental. And in my brain, I might even convince myself that's me helping you somehow. Right?
And I think we've all been on the receiving end of that, right? Where someone is trying to help you, or it looks like they're trying to help you, and you're in this position of, oh, I guess in this power dynamic, I should be grateful that the boss is paying attention to me, or this, coach or mentor is pointing things out to help me, but it's not helpful, right? And I feel like I can't give that feedback. I can promise you, if someone genuinely wants to help you, if you tell them, hey, this isn't helpful, they will stop and they'll come up with a new approach. Whereas if it's about them, I guess if they're operating from an unhealthy schema, which they may not even be aware of, and they see themselves as a helper and therefore they have to help you, they might get defensive, they might attack you, they might say, oh, you're unteachable, there's nothing that I can do, or you don't want to learn, you don't want to grow, you don't want to develop in your career. And actually, I think in those situations, if you've been on either end, which I'm sure many of us have been on both sides, it's really important to step back and remember why everyone is in the room, right? If you're helping someone develop in their career and they've turned up to a meeting, you might not like the way they're responding to your feedback, but you have to remember they've trusted you with their time. They've turned up. So they obviously do want to grow enough to be there. Maybe they're not ready to hear everything you want to tell them. Or maybe you need to deal with the log in your eye before you try and help someone with the spec, right? And you can do both simultaneously, but you definitely need to reflect on why you're helping people. And if you think someone isn't helping you, a good test is tell them.
Yeah.
In a respectful way, because they're giving you their time. Hey, I'm not finding this helpful. I don't know if it's me or if it's our approach or if it's something you said, but I'm feeling, what are you feeling? I'm feeling a bit defensive. I'm feeling attacked. I'm feeling criticized. It might be my stuff. Can we pause and come back to this?
Yeah.
That's such a helpful conversation that people are often too scared to have because they don't want to burn bridges. I've had that conversation many times. And I promise you...
On the receiving end or the giving end or both?
More on the receiving end. So I've had a lot of mentorship support that's kind of helped me to grow in my career. But a couple of times on the giving end, where I've had some difficult one-to-ones or I've had relationships where I'm mentoring someone, I think it hasn't happened a huge amount because I do go out of my way to try to help people, and therefore I've been on this journey of self-awareness for a while. But I can think of a handful of times where it's happened, and I can promise you that feedback leads to deeper connections, a better relationship, and more mutual respect.
Yeah, it sounds almost scary, right? It's some courage to be
Honestly.
like, this isn't helping me, because you don't want to feel like you're insulting a person or not being grateful. I think you're so right, though, because that's truth.
Yes.
And what truth does is it makes me respect you, right?
Honestly.
If you had just kept your mouth shut and then later I found out that you didn't tell me the thing,
it's
suddenly
offensive.
It's offensive. It's also like, can I trust you to be honest with me?
Exactly.
Right?
It's like this person doesn't trust me.
Yeah,
Why?
it's uncomfortable in the moment.
And it doesn't always go great in the moment. So I can think of 2-3 times where this has blown up in my face, kind of on both sides.
Okay.
And actually, in 2 of the 3 cases, I'm on great terms with the people involved because in 2 cases, they were able to reflect and they actually came back and apologized for how they reacted. They explained they were being defensive. They kind of did the work. In the other case, I would say it kind of freed me from an unhealthy relationship where, trust is one of those things where it's invisible until it's broken. And once it's broken, sometimes you can tiptoe around on the fragments that are on the floor and keep cutting yourself on the broken bits of trust. Or you can say, do you know what, I'm going to step out of this situation. If you decide to clean up the mess that your actions have made, great, we can try this again. But for now, I'm going to step out. And sometimes you do need to accept that these difficult conversations, they're scary and you have to be brave because there is the potential it could go wrong. But actually, if it goes wrong, is it an unhealthy relationship maybe that you need to step away from? And that can be an unhealthy working relationship. It can be an unhealthy personal relationship. Sometimes there is crossover. But it's very important, I think, to be able to test the strength of your relationships so that you can create healthier boundaries and better communication.
In both of those cases, a helpful result came up.
Honestly.
Even if it's not the one you originally wanted, sometimes what we need is not what we want, and that's okay. Yeah. There's something you've alluded to a few times. Work-life harmony. You don't say work-life balance.
I hate work-life balance.
Talk to me about the difference. I love this. Talk to me about the difference.
Yeah, so work-life balance, I think it's just impossible, if we're honest about it. This idea that everything can be perfectly balanced, the idea that you have to hold all these things and not tip one way or the other. With work-life harmony, so I see balance as trying to like walk on a tightrope, and you're probably going to fall off, and you're walking on a tightrope whilst juggling. It's almost impossible to do that. With work-life harmony, it's more like conducting an orchestra, right? So you're thinking about the areas of your life that need attention in that moment. It's about being present in now, not worrying about tomorrow, being mindful of it, being wise, planning ahead, being prudent, but thinking, okay, in this moment, what is required of me, and giving your full focus to that. And sometimes you have to do a lot of work to plan this. So I have quite detailed chunks in my calendar where I have planning time, and I have short-term planning time and long-term planning time. I do a lot of public speaking, so I have time where I work on my keynotes, and sometimes that's a keynote that is booked. Sometimes it's a keynote for a topic that keeps coming up that I'm like, I want to be ready because someone's going to ask me for this. And this happened today, actually. So just before the podcast, I was booked for a keynote, and I just finished an outline that would be perfect for this. And then they asked me to do it based on what I've been speaking about. It's similar to a keynote I've done before, but not exactly. But it was that long-term prep which came in useful. So sometimes it is a case of, okay, my focus needs to be fully on my daughter's upcoming birthday party, and that's okay. But you need to know that's going to come, right? Birthdays are the same time every year. There's no excuse to be scrambling. So for me, I have in my calendar when my kids' birthdays are. I always take the day off. I didn't want to be stressed on their birthday. And I always put reminders in. So like X amount of time before. If it's like a big one, we plan it. And it means that I can run a kids' party now. I've done it so many times. The first few times it was really stressful because I was trying to juggle it. I was trying to, okay, I've got all these things to do. On my lunch break, I'm going to order this. I'm going to ask my PA to do that. And I was in pursuit of balance. I was just falling all over the place.
Unbalanced.
I was unbalanced. I was dropping balls everywhere. Whereas with work-life harmony, you're not trying to juggle all of the balls. You don't even need to hold them. You've got a nice little basket. You can pick them out
I like that.
as and when you need to, right? And it just makes life feel more bearable. You're not stressed about all of the things, the myriad of things. You have your list. You're aware of what's in the basket, but you show up and you focus on what is needed now, and the parts of your life that you need to conduct into your beautiful orchestra to create harmony. You do that. Sometimes it will start to be off balance. You'll realize I'm playing too many parts. There's discord. It doesn't sound very great. So you stop, you reflect, you take stock, and then you play a different song. So I like work-life harmony. Work-life balance, I hate questions about it in interviews. I hate when people ask me how to achieve it. I hate when I'm often held up as this example of what, like I was speaking to a journalist for a newspaper article a little bit ago. They're like, how do you do it? You know, how do you balance everything? And I was quite honest. I was like, I don't. No one does. No one does. Sometimes we feel the pressure to project this image of I balance all of the things.
Yeah.
I do this every week. No, for me, it's very much I have areas of my life that are important, and I make sure that I give attention to all of those areas as and when they need attention. And that will fluctuate, and that's okay.
This is really important because to wrap us up today, the last thing I wanted to ask you was along the lines of what you just said, is like with this harmony, you're trying to maintain or are maintaining, you still seem to be achieving, getting done, whatever words feel right to you, more than like so many people, right? So if I think like you exited a business, you got NED roles, like 2 or 3 other things, Mensa, new things you're working on, and you have not just one child or two children, but four, and they're all quite young, right?
Yes.
So it's like, whereas me, I'm thinking like, I want kids one day. I don't even have them yet, and I'm here like trying to get the ball rolling on stuff for like 3 months, and it's like progress is being made, but it all feels so messy. I'm like, how do you do it? How do you do it all? And maybe the better question within that, based on what you just said, is how do you, if I had to say, Rachel, please teach me how to successfully start the thing I'm working on with all the busyness or all the different demands I've got going on, what would you say, right? Teach me how to start the things and do the cool things the way you are.
Okay, so
maybe it sounds like a crappy question.
No,
but
it's
you
a
get
great,
what
it's
I
a great
mean.
question, and it's very honest because work-life harmony. It's something that I've talked a lot about over the years, but I've been talking more about it recently because I had to almost figure out this philosophy in more detail. It sounds very fluffy, and in a way, it is, right? It's not about doing it all or having it all, because people frequently say to me, "Oh, you have it all. You've got all these things. It looks all shiny."
Yes.
Right. The reality is no one has it all. And
Yes.
I've had these conversations with other people. So I was at an event recently for a speaking bureau I'm part of, and a baroness spoke, and she has 9 children. I mean, she gave birth to 9 children, and she looked great, and she spoke eloquently. And I was looking her up, and she's got this cute little fashion Instagram with her 9 children. And I was like, how? Because I'm struggling to look put together and sane with 4.
It's so good.
Honestly. So there will always be someone that you can look to and it's like, they're doing more. But none of that is helpful, right? It's good to know, like, as humans, we are so incredible. We can achieve so much and it's wonderful. We have to focus, right? We have to cut out distractions. So a big part of work-life harmony is the notes you play. It's also the notes you don't play, right? People hate when I say this. When I get asked, how do you read so much? How do you do this? How do you do that? I don't have a TV, right? Haven't had a TV since I was about 18. I went to university, and with like 2 brief times where I got one, like for the Xbox or for the PS3 or whatever. I love great gaming. But I found as a teenager, I spent so much time watching TV, and friends would ask if I want to do something, and I would get out the guide, as in the TV guide by The Guardian, and look at what was on and decide. Obviously, I was 18 back in like 2008, so this is before we had like TV on demand and whatnot. I just thought it was unhealthy, and I have a personality where I can get quite addicted to things. So it might not be TV for you, it might be gaming, it might whatever it is. I pick TV because apparently the average Brit watches between 3 to 6 hours of TV a day.
I've heard this, which is
a day.
I
can believe that.
Like how many years of your life? By the time you're 80, that's like a quarter of your life.
But even in a day, right? Because if you want to work on a project, you can take 2 hours and you can sit down and you can plan, right? Or you could watch 2 hours of TV while you scroll and look at your phone, and then sit and feel miserable for an hour about the lack of achievement in your life, right? So it's not that I don't watch TV. That's not true. We have a projector. We have, some various subscriptions, which we turn off and on depending on when we need to watch something. And we do things like Movie Monday with the kids, but it's intentional. Going back to that word you said, intentionality is everything. I have social media, but I've cut out doom scrolling by using things like, there's an app called OneSec, which is excellent. It's like £2 or something, very money well spent. And for me, instead, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm putting frameworks that I've used for years into audio courses on my Substack that people can use. So I've actually just published one called the Dream Plan Do framework. And it's literally that. It's about how do you take a dream, take an idea, turn it into a clear plan with steps, and then have a group of people to be accountable with to share your progress with. Because research shows that only 8% of people actually achieve their goals.
Yes.
Which is scary. It's a crazy number.
But you're going to tell me how much higher it is when you've got people who are accountable to you.
76%. 3 things. Down the goals, you create a plan, and you send weekly progress updates. It goes from 8% to 76%.
Wow.
So I want to be part of that 76%. And I have been actually for a number of years. So I love setting a New Year's resolution. I do love my goals. I love OKRs. And I've helped, numerous companies to set OKRs. That's the objective key result framework. I love a goal. As humans, we need goals. But I think the reason people are so against goals, resolutions, is because so many of them fall to the wayside. But that's because we're not necessarily doing them right. So having clarity, having a plan, and having accountability, you need those things. So the Dream Plan Do framework, I'll give you the link so you can put it in the show notes.
Please.
It's on my Substack, and it's free for my paid subscribers, and then it's also available to people who come along to my events.
Oh, so, nice.
Yeah, so I do have a framework, and I'm working on one on time optimization, because that's another thing that comes up a lot. You read all these books. Many of them are created by people who maybe don't have families, or a lot of time management books, let's be honest, they're written by men who have a wife who does everything. So if you don't have a wife who does everything, either you have an egalitarian relationship, or you're not married, or you are the wife. You need a different approach. So that's another thing I'm working on, and I'll put it out on my Substack when it's ready. There's
so much more I want to ask you. I have to wrap us up for time. Rachel, there's a closing question. You have 2 minutes to answer that I ask everyone who comes on the show. The show is called Lost in Searching, and I'd love to know, what is the biggest question in your life that you are still searching for the answer to?
Still searching for the answer to? Okay, that is a very scary question. The biggest question I'm still searching for the answer to? So I would say it's probably going to be in my parenting. So as a parent, I love, the attachment model of parenting. And I think a healthy attachment is the most important thing that everyone needs, not just kids, adults too. And it's not something you can necessarily optimize. You either have a healthy attachment and you're working on it, or you don't. So I guess the big question, if I'm honest, that is quite difficult is, how do I make sure that I'm equally creating healthy attachments with all 4 of my kids and with my husband? So it's a messy question, because it's something that I frequently think about. I'll spend quality time with my twins on my days that I don't work, and I'll think, I didn't quite spend the same amount of time with my eldest. How do I do this? They're happy, they're healthy, they're balanced. We have a good attachment, thank God. But yeah, figuring out the best way to navigate attachment with multiple relationships where you need healthy attachment. That is a question. I don't know. I might be thinking about that for the rest of my life. But that is front of mind for me.
Yeah. It's all a journey of discovery, right? So if you had an answer today, it might change tomorrow, and maybe that's okay.
It's recently changed. It's funny you mentioned Gabor Mate, because I've been and another hack for reading books, audiobooks. They're now on Spotify, which is great. So if you have Spotify anyway, I've been listening to Hold On To Your Kids, which my husband asked me to read, and I said no. Because I was like, when you read the stack of parenting books I've been asking you to read, I'll read your fancy new book. I had a very bad attitude. I fixed it now. I'm listening to the audiobook. Love Gabor Mate's work. But I realised there's so many things I've been doing wrong as a parent, and it's freeing. It's wonderful, but I'm only halfway through the book.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it will develop more.
Absolutely.
And if you've heard me say anything else on podcasts or write something crazy about parenting, just disregard it. Read Hold On To Your Kids and Boundaries.
I hear this.
Boundaries for Kids is a great book too.
I hear this from a lot of parents. It's like, look, you don't get it 100% right. And that's okay.
Possible.
Exactly, because it's impossible.
My favourite parenting book of all time is called Good Enough Parenting.
Okay.
And actually that book, if you ever want to have kids, I recommend reading that book.
Okay.
It's written by schema therapists as well.
I want to what?
It's written by some schema therapists.
What's it called, sorry?
It's called Good Enough Parenting.
Good Enough, okay.
And it's very much about letting go of these notions of perfectionism that can kind of wreck our parenting journey.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Rachel, that brings us to the end. Thank you so much. I appreciate you for coming on the show and sharing so much with us.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I hope you found it valuable. We've reached a number of really important milestones on this show already. It's only been a couple of months, but I'm so grateful to those of you who not only subscribe, but also who listen this far along, who leave the comments on posts, or who give me really powerful, beautiful messages in response. It's been a humbling journey, and there is so much more to come. If there's something about this episode and the question that we answered, or any of the learnings that you took away that you want to make sure someone else you know understands themselves, then please do share this episode with them, along with your reflections, teaching other people something that you learned, passing the information on, or even just writing it down for yourself. All help you retain the answers to this, and any inspiration it gave you even more. That's the purpose of all this, is to give you as much positive, powerful, impactful results as possible on your journey to developing your own inner leader from so many different dimensions, not just the one we've talked about today. So thank you so much for being here, sending lots of love, and here's to your success.